Just over 40 years ago, as Japan's quest for economic growth spurred its need for energy, a nuclear complex was built on the coast at Fukushima. It was made up of 6 reactors. Japan has more than 50 reactors in all, supplying 30% of its electricity. There are more than 440 reactors around the world, with many more planned. A day after the quake, a reactor building exploded. Then another, and another. But scientists knew of the earthquake and tsunami risks, so what went wrong?
I think the risk of tsunami was just not figured into the equation. It's a situation where not all contingencies were taken into account. Because, again, the earthquake was handled, that was fine. It was a tsunami that smashed into, that swamped all of the 6 stations afterwards that is causing all this problem.
The tsunami knocked out the backup generators needed to pump water that cooled the reactors. They had automatically shut down with the earthquake, but inside they stayed hot.
Inside of that primary containment vessel is the nuclear reactor itself, which is made up of zinc rods called fuel rods, and inside of those rods is contained, each rod is contained many hundreds of pellets of uranium, which is undergoing nuclear reactions and produces heat. And the fuel rods are surrounded by water, which is constantly being pumped in. Water under very high pressure, it's turned into steam, and then that steam is vented off, and it turns the blades of electrical dynamos to produce electrical current.
So it's just like a kettle?
Just like a kettle.
The key task all along was to pump in water to cool the reactors. The aim is to keep water flowing through to reduce temperatures, but there's a dilemma here because this creates steam which could trigger a leak or explosion. And even so, once exposed, they emit radiation. Also, a tank outside the sealed reactor contained used nuclear fuel rods. Like old batteries, they're still dangerous, and they too have to be cooled by water, or again, leak radiation. Each day, the Japanese government tried to reassure. As soon as the earthquake struck, the Prime Minister addressed nuclear fears.
Regarding our nuclear power facilities, some of the nuclear power plants have stopped automatically, but so far, no radioactive material or radiation has been confirmed to have been leaked to the outside.
Naoto Kan even visited the plant and was filmed holding crisis meetings in what became a standard blue boiler suit. There are many issues to tackle, he says. The government will do all it can to cope with the situation. There seemed, though, to be no stopping it. Nuclear fuel rods, with no water to cool them, were in danger of melting down and releasing radiation into the atmosphere.
Well, there are 2 principal radioactive contaminants, and one of them is iodine-131, which goes for the thyroid, could cause cancers of the thyroid. That's relatively short-lived, and it will be gone in just a few days. But the real danger is cesium-137, which goes for muscle and bone. And depending upon the concentrations of it, it could take a century before it is lowered to 1% of its initial concentration.
More and more unprecedented and desperate measures were used. Japan's nuclear future was put in the hands of a few brave men as radiation levels, measured in millisieverts, rose around the plant. 250 millisieverts an hour for a while, and that's equal to a whole lifetime's safe exposure. Death by radiation is very nasty, a complete breakdown of the immune system. They became the faceless heroes of Japan. Helicopters scooped water from the sea, 2,000 gallons a time, and flew back to drop it on billowing smoke. But each reactor needs 12,000 gallons a day to keep cool. It didn't end the problem. The area around the plant was evacuated. First 10 kilometers, then 20. But in one hospital, the staff refused to leave, saying their patients were the priority.
We're not really supposed to stay here, but this is our job. I really resent the nuclear plant.
Then higher radiation levels were measured in Tokyo. The US and other governments made arrangements for their nationals to leave. China, Germany and other big nuclear-powered countries are re-examining their projects. Japan was accused of glossing over and being secretive with information, and a senior community official spoke about being abandoned.
The people of Fukushima Prefecture have reached the limits of their tolerance of fear and anxiety, and I hope that the people of Japan understand this.
Japan has been through disaster many times before. They still remember the dead from the nuclear bomb attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The Prime Minister has described this catastrophe as the worst crisis since the Second World War.
Could I get your attention, please? There has been a state of emergency declared.
The world, too, has faced nuclear challenges. In 1979 in Pennsylvania, there was a partial core meltdown in a reactor at the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant, and some radioactive gases escaped into the atmosphere. Then, in 1986, an explosion at a plant in Chernobyl, in the then Soviet Union, sent a plume of radioactive fallout into the atmosphere that spread for hundreds of miles. It is that spectre, now from Japan, that began to haunt the world.
We do not expect harmful levels of radiation to reach the United States, whether it's the West Coast, Hawaii, Alaska, or U.S. territories in the Pacific. Let me repeat that. We do not expect harmful levels of radiation to reach the West Coast, Hawaii, Alaska, or U.S. territories in the Pacific.
And it suffered dreadful earthquakes. Kanto, near Tokyo in 1923, that killed more than 140,000. 1948, Fukui, near Kyoto, nearly 4,000 dead. Kobe, in 1995, more than 6,000 lost their lives. Japan is in the northwest corner of what's known as the Pacific Ring of Fire, where pressure from the Earth's plates create 90% of the world's earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. Japan is at its most vulnerable spot. And in 2004, the Asian tsunami killed almost 250,000 people, destroying Aceh in Indonesia and many other places, just as the sea swamped northeast Japan. The world will become a little safer this week from lessons learned, but will anything substantively change about how and where we live?
People have to live somewhere, and they need to also produce food, they need to produce fish, they need to produce and agriculture. They need factories, and this has all got to go somewhere. And it's impossible to move every human being on this planet away from natural disaster or danger. Hurricanes, earthquakes, volcanoes, these are all part of the hazard of living on planet Earth.
Nuclear power is also an important part of our own energy future, along with renewable sources like wind, solar, natural gas, and clean coal.
So we will continue to use nuclear power. The tectonic plates of the Earth's crust will continue to move. We'll keep building our homes on earthquake faults and cluster around the coast. More aware, though, that our lives, with all our tears and hopes, are just a small and vulnerable part of planet Earth, the slightest shift, and colossal human impact.
や机の下に身を隠してください。現在ご覧いただいているのは最初の地震。
Welcome back to BBC World News America. In Japan, it's been 10 days now since the dual blow of an earthquake and tsunami ravaged the country, and still the people are under threat of a nuclear threat. Things seem to be improving slowly at the Fukushima plant, where all 6 reactors now have a power supply. But there's still no time frame for a resolution, and concerns about the food supply continue to grow. Meanwhile, the human tragedy is also still unfolding. The town of Rikuzen, Takata, is one of those that took the full force of the tsunami, and it's from there that the BBC's Damien Grammaticus sent this report.
When the sea has taken all you know, how do you comprehend it? Every landmark obliterated. So even finding where his home stood isn't easy for 12-year-old Takuma Wagazugi. This is the first time he's been back, but at house number 3 on his street, there's just a void.
My desk was up there, my bed was over here, and this is where my bookshelf was.
And this is all his sister 10-year-old Sayaka found, her school bag. She used it for trips to the beach with her father.
Because we live near the sea, I could play there. I would go with Dad. It was fun. When the tsunami came, it was scary, but I like living by the sea.
Her father is missing. He was a rescue worker directing people to safety while his wife and children fled. 500 bodies have been found here so far, but not his. When the tsunami struck at 2:45 that Friday, most of the adults were here in the middle of town. This is a place of 26,000 people. It's hard to believe it now, but you have to imagine shops and offices, supermarkets and restaurants all busy. The children, well, they were in schools, and those are built on higher ground to protect them from tsunamis. So most of them survived. The high school, their place of refuge, is now full of children who are grieving. And for Takuma and Sayaka, it's become their temporary home.
I wish more people were searching for the missing. I hope we'll find Dad alive and well soon. He's a very important member of my family, and I love him a lot.
In the mud and debris, Sayaka discovered something else. A photo of their father. He was a very good man, her mother says, describing him as the pillar of our family. She went to the morgue today, but still couldn't find his body. Damien Grammaticus, BBC News, Rikuzen, Takata.
BBC's Marika Oy. Marika, could you just tell us, give us an update as to what the latest is on the nuclear situation there?
Well, as of this morning, Tokyo Electric, which runs the nuclear power plant in Fukushima, they still haven't been able to start the work that they were doing yesterday after black smoke was seen rising from the number 3 reactor at about 4 p.m. yesterday in Fukushima. All the workers had to be evacuated, and all the cooling measures of the reactors, like spraying water and feeding power into their cooling systems, had to be suspended, and it hasn't been able to start just yet. So it shows how difficult it is to stabilize the situation there.
Now, obviously, we've heard a lot about sort of how the impact of the lack of electricity has had a big part in sort of the unfolding nuclear crisis. I'm curious to know also what impact it's had elsewhere in economic terms.
Well, we're still experiencing rolling blackouts, which obviously affects households, but also Japanese businesses. Companies like Toyota, Nissan and Sony have announced their plans to start some of their production, but Toyota actually just came out this morning and said that they still can't start operating until probably Thursday because they're facing some shortages of materials. So it's not just rolling blackouts, but also slow transportation, shortages of those products is a huge challenge that Japanese businesses are facing as well.
We're going to have to leave it there, but Marika Oy, thank you for that update from Tokyo.